morning. So happy to see you here at KGNU's Making Waves event to celebrate the station making waves for 40 years. Yes. And it's an incredible achievement that could not have happened without all of these people here in this room and many people far beyond this room. So thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for all you have contributed to KGNU. My name is Risa Keller. I got involved in the station when I walked in the door in 1992, having just moved back to Boulder. I grew up here and came back and started working at the front desk to see what was going on and get a sense of what the station was about. And I knew I loved the station from the get-go, and it just got better as I got more involved. And now I'm on the board of directors and couldn't be happier about being able to work on behalf of this amazing community resource. Thank you. Thank you. And tonight we're here not only to celebrate 40 years in existence and honor these incredible volunteers who have been with us, many of them since the beginning. We are also here to launch a capital campaign so that we can expand and grow and turn into a regional media center that serves even more people than we've been able to serve before. But younger people, people from all walks of life, people of all backgrounds. And so we're excited to do that, and we're excited to have your help doing that. Tonight we're going to get started with a talk by Jim Hightower, and then dinner will come out shortly. We'll be hearing from Amy Goodman as well, and be sure to let your server know your meal preference if they ask. We will have a hand raise at the end, a little fundraiser for KGNU to support our capital campaign kickoff. And we're excited to celebrate tonight the past, present, and future of KGNU with all of you. Now, your silent auction items will be available starting at 8 p.m. You can pay with cash or credit card. And please make sure you pick up all your items this evening. And with that, I'll turn it over to Barbara Stern, our board vice chair.
Hello there. Nice to see everybody out there. I can't believe it. We've worked so hard on this event for months, and it's so nice to see how everyone showed up. Really appreciate that. I've had the pleasure of being on the board now and the chair of this event. And next we'd like to begin the evening by thanking our generous sponsors and introducing some special guests. The Alliance Center is one of our sponsors this evening, and we thank them for their support of the night's fundraiser. The Alliance Center is a mission-driven nonprofit with an event space and collaborative working space. The Alliance Center convenes and mobilizes a network of nonprofit organizations, for-profit businesses, government agencies, academic institutions, and community members to collaboratively create sustainability-focused solutions. We also want to thank Ecoscape. They're a longtime KGNU supporter. Ecoscape is a Boulder landscaping company offering design, build, and maintenance services throughout Boulder County, including Longmont, Lafayette, Louisville, Niwot, Boulder, and the foothills communities west of Boulder. We also want to thank Pulitzer Promotions, a woman-owned company located in Lafayette, Colorado. Pulitzer Promotions works with businesses to promote their company through branded products like t-shirts, mugs, and many other things. Also, we want to thank the Blue Federal Credit Union. Blue is a member-owned, not-for-profit cooperative that exists to serve and help people succeed financially in life and strengthening the communities where we work and live. And we also have special thanks to the Millennium Harvest House, the Boulder Marriott, Hazel's Beverage World, and the Boulder Bookstore. So let's give a round of applause for our sponsors for making this event possible. We'd also like to acknowledge our elected officials here in the room with us tonight. Colorado State Representative for House District 10, the Honorable Edie Hooten. Colorado State Representative for House District 11, the Honorable Jonathan Singer. And State Senator for House District 17, the Honorable Matt Jones. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Liz Lane, and I've been a News and Public Affairs volunteer at KGNU since 1993, and I currently serve as KGNU's board secretary. It's my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker tonight. Jim Hightower is an American syndicated columnist, progressive political activist, public speaker, and author. Many of you will remember another Texas political commentator, Molly Ivins, who graced our fair city many, many years with her wit and wisdom at the Conference on World Affairs. Molly once quipped that if Will Rogers and Mother Jones had had a baby, Jim Hightower would be that rambunctious child, mad as hell with a sense of humor. Texas born and raised, Jim ran for public office while also working as an editor of the Texas Observer, hoping to become a commissioner who could help regulate the Texas oil and gas industry. We need you here in Colorado for that, Jim, I think. He lost that race, but soon became the state's agriculture commissioner, a post that he held for 8 years. Since 1993, Jim has produced Hightower Radio, a daily 2-minute commentary broadcast over 130 affiliates, including KGNU every single Monday and Wednesday morning at 8:30 a.m. In addition, Jim writes a monthly newsletter, The Hightower Lowdown, which has more than 125,000 subscribers. His New York Times best-selling book is called Swim Against the Current, Even a Dead Fish Can Go with the Flow. Together, Jim and his late wife, Susan DeMarco, spent the last 45 years, in Jim's own words, quote, teaming up in progressive and populist battles against the big shots, bastards, and bullshitters who try to run roughshod over workaday people and democratic values. Please help me in welcoming America's #1 populist and KGNU's dear friend, Jim Hightower.
Hello. Thank you so much. Great to be with you. Great to be back in Boulder. Wow, a 3-course dinner. This is amazing. KGNU goes uptown, huh? When I was editor of the Texas Observer, if we were going to have a 7-course dinner, it was going to be a Slim Jim and a 6-pack. That's pretty much it. So this is really a tremendous sense of progress that you good folks have made here, and thank you for making waves for all these years and for allowing a scruffy Texas populist like myself to come in here to be part of this 40th birthday hoorah and community radio palooza as we celebrate the humble birth of KGNU in a shack on the banks of the Boulder Creek, right behind this, as I understand it, where this happened. This beginning to sound like a Texas politician story. We were born in a shack on the high plains. We were so poor, my only pet was a tumbleweed. But that's how it began, here in Boulder. And not only to celebrate that, but to contemplate the next 40 years of progressive, radioactive agitation and democratization. You, the programmers, the board, the volunteers, the donors have built a national model for what it is to be progressive media generally and community radio specifically. The idea is to be diverse, feisty, independent, free-thinking, gutsy. There's no cowboy saying out in West Texas, speak the truth but ride a fast horse. And that's what you've been able to do over the years. Your station can be all of that, feisty and gutsy and intelligent and unifying, because Well, because it's your station. It doesn't belong. Yet the Koch brothers would readily buy this thing. They would love to have this thing. But then it would be their station. It wouldn't be your station. It certainly wouldn't be a community station. No chain owns it. No conglomerate. No corporate advertisers. There's an old motel down the street from where I live in Austin that has an iconic sort of marquee out ends on Congress Avenue, South Congress, and got a slogan up there that says, "No additives, no preservatives, corporate free since 1938." Which is kind of the Austin attitude, but you are KGNU's preservative. Yes, the station has megawatts of power, but you supporters, volunteers, staffers, listeners, underwriters, you're the station's real power. They don't call it community radio for nothing. It's called that because you are the community and the station is the community as well. So, special joy. Just a special joy for me to be here, particularly with my longtime colleague, smart, scrappy, savvy leader of progressive radio, Amy Goodman, who is a champion of all things progressive. You know, Oscar Wilde said, "Be yourself, everyone else is already taken." You don't get more yourself than Amy Goodman, and you can get her every morning across the country on the radio and on television as well. So it just makes me happier than a chigger at a nudist colony. Standing up here looking out at all of you corporate greed whackers and right-wing butt kickers as we gather here in this Trumpian summer of our discontent. A time not to moan and not to wring our hands, but to organize, strategize, harmonize, and mobilize. Not to take America back. That's what the Tea Party has done. They've taken us back at least 100 years so far. But to move America forward, all America, every single American, to move forward in a progressive sense. Here we are in election season. FDR in 1936 in his re-election campaign said, "Join me in this campaign not to win votes alone, but to restore America to its own people." That's what we're trying to do. It's as fundamental as that, because America doesn't belong to us anymore. Obviously, we live in strange times. We're governed by Trump's freak show of Goofy, Daffy, Sleepy, Sleazy, Larry, Curly, and Moe. The whole bunch wouldn't make good landfill from what I've seen of them so far. I call them ironic conservatives. Ironic. Jack Nicholson said that he never understood the meaning of irony until one day his mother called him a son of a bitch. Well, these sons of bitches are saying that they're against big government. We don't want no big government unless you're a woman and you want to control your own body. Then we need big government to take care of that. We don't need no big government because we support local control unless you try to pass paid sick leave or ban fracking in your own community. Then we're going to interject with state preemption. We don't need no big government unless there's 12-year-old, 10-year-old, 8-year-old, 2-year-old children coming across the border as refugees. Then we need big government to throw them in a cage and to put them on trial. Jeff Sessions put these kids on trial. There was a judge down in Texas. He had a 2-year-old in the dock. And he said, "How do I explain immigration law to a 2-year-old? But the problem is not explaining it to that 2-year-old, explaining it to the 2-year-old in the White House is the problem that we have right there. I mentioned I come to you from Austin, but I come from South Austin. Molly lived on the south side, John, Henry Falk, a lot of us kind of crazy, lost people over there. We're a little more iconoclastic on the south side. Our unofficial slogan is we're all here because we're not all there. And I think that is what brings us together in community radio and in this time of little d democratic possibility is that we recognize that the powers that be are not at all there in terms of grasping the essential notion of what America is about. I mean, they're as confused as goats on AstroTurf when it comes to understanding that we're all supposed to be in this thing together. And by the powers that be, I don't mean just that Trump clown car up in Washington, but the moneyed elites and the corporate supremacists who put them in that car and are driving the car. I'm talking about the downsizers and privatizers, the Walmart wage whackers and big old frackers, the Wall Street plutocrats and Koch brother kleptocrats, and a group that I call the 6 Bs, the bosses, the bankers, the billionaires, the big shots bastards and bullshitters, who are running roughshod over us, treating us as though they're the top dogs and we're just a bunch of fire hydrants out here in the countryside. So they're knocking down the middle class, they're holding down the poor, and they're tearing down our democratic rights. Actually, economists have a technical term for what they're doing to us. It's called stealing. Remember that song that Woody Guthrie had about Pretty Boy Floyd, the outlaw, over here in Oklahoma? Had a verse in it that said, "As through this world I travel, I see lots of funny men. Some will rob you with a 6-gun, and some with a fountain pen." It's the fountain pens who are doing the serious stealing in our society today, and that needs to be our focus. And now they're stealing the very idea of America, the idea that we the people might build an egalitarian society with little d democratic government. Instead, they're using every weapon in their arsenal to establish a de facto American aristocracy of monopolistic rule. They're using the dark money in political campaigns, the 14,000 corporate lobbyists in Washington, D.C., where there are 435 members of Congress, 14,000 lobbyists, 535, count the Senate. The union busters, Fox News, the courts, academic hucksters, front groups like ALEC, the governors and Congress critters. You know, they say that in sex, I don't know much about this, I was having a guy explain it to me earlier. They say that in sex, using a feather can be erotic, but using the whole chicken, that's just nasty. And these people are using the whole chicken on us. Well, you might ask, why don't we hear about this on the nightly news? Why don't we read about it in the major American newspapers, such as they are? Well, where's the media? Well, it's been bought. It's been merged, submerged, monopolized, controlled. 30 years ago, 50 conglomerates controlled 90% of the mass media outlets. Just 50 controlled 90%. Today, 5 control 90%. And 2 of those are about to merge. So we're down to 4. Corporate CEOs are the new royalty. It takes $22 million just to be in the top 100 paid chief executive officers of corporations. Jeff Bezos, Amazon, a thief, basically. $125 billion in personal wealth. And yet, you know, some of these guys getting so rich they can afford to air condition hell. And I tell you what, they better be setting some money aside for that project, I think. It's unmarried, but yet they say, no, Hightower, no, we're not going to hell, we're going to heaven because we are philanthropists, don't you know? Yes, we make a lot of money, but that allows us to contribute to charity. And that absolves whatever else, where we got the money. You know, when you hear some rich bastard say, I want to give back to the people, that means he took too much. Let's start with that. I can tell you a quick story about charity, about philanthropists, and how the gods feel about it. It's from Earl Long when he was governor over in Louisiana. He used to tell a story about a rich man who died and tried to get into heaven. But But if you'd gone to that little Methodist church that I did in Denison, Texas, growing up, you'd know that you just don't go into heaven. You got to appear at the pearly gates. There's going to be an angel outside those gates going to look over your life. And then St. Peter, back behind the gate, is going to decide whether you get to come in or not. So here comes this rich man. And the angel looks over his life and said, oh my God, you never did no good for nobody, no way. What are you doing here? And the rich man said, oh, and the angel said, the rich man said, not entirely true, not entirely true. Wait a minute. So that was that time in 1935 that a widow woman was on the street and I gave her a nickel. She needed car fare home. And the angel said, so? He said, well, there was that time that a blind beggar man was on the corner, 1945, and I gave him a nickel. And the angel said, that doesn't make up for a life of greed. And the rich man said, well, now wait a minute, I've got a consistent pattern of philanthropy because 1955, I was coming out of my bank at Christmas time. There was a Salvation Army kettle and I put a nickel in there. And the angel turned back to St. Peter and said, what in the world are we going to do with this man? And St. Peter said, give him back his 15 cents and tell him to go to hell. Because we're not after charity. We're after economic fairness, social justice, and equal opportunity for all people. That's what we're seeking. That's the America that we want. Well, that's who they are. That's who they've always been. In fact, the core of American politics has always been the struggle between the privileged few and the many. It's come down battle after battle after battle over the decades to this thought: too few people control too much of the money and power, and they're using that control to get more control for themselves at our expense. That's the fight we've been in forever, and that's the fight we are hellaciously involved in right now. Here we are again. So my message to you, I'm sure you're wondering what it is by now, is this: it's up to us. It's not up to Trump and the GOP. It's not up to the Wall Street and the Fortune 500. It's not up to the Democratic National Committee and the DCCC, that's for sure. It's not up to Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren either. It's up to us out here in the countryside at a grassroots level, working through community institutions like KGNU to put together a real politics. Amazingly, we still have some go slow, don't rock the corporate boat Democratic leaders and even leaders of progressive organizations nationally who say, oh, well, yes, but we can survive the Trump tempest if we just put our Democratic ship in a safe harbor. Well, you can put a ship in a safe harbor, but that's not why ships were made. Ships were made to go out in dangerous waters, and that's where our ship must be going, out there, standing for all the values and all the principles and all the specific issues that we believe in and the KGNU talks about every single day. And the good news is this: the people of America are revolting in the very best sense of that term. You know, they say that we must resist Trump, and certainly we must. But I've got a three-pronged program called RIP. RIP. Resist Trump for sure, but insist on a strong progressive program and then persist in achieving that political goal. Because we don't win our first time out. We're going to win a bunch of races this year, friends. I can tell you that. I've been all over the country, and in the red as well as the blue, and we're going to have great successes. But it's not like we're going to take charge of everything suddenly and we're going to have a progressive enlightenment. That's not going to happen in 2018, but it's going to begin in 2018. If you take your first step. Willie Nelson, my friend, told me once, said, Hightower, the early bird might get the worm, but it's the second mouse that gets the cheese. I want to explain that to your neighbor there. But we got a nationwide movement of democratic populism that is actually on the move. There's a great group in Chicago, based in Chicago. People's Action is called. It's in, I think it's in about 30 states by now. Doing great grassroots organizing, steadily building, and People's Action did a survey. They went to 10 states, 72 rural counties that had been carried by Trump. And they did a survey, not by phone, not by email. They went door to door. So these were front porch conversations, 5,500 front porch conversations that they had, asking people the open question, what's important to you? And the number one thing response that people said was, nobody ever asked me that before. Nobody in politics has ever asked me that before. But then when they began to talk about it, what was important to them was not immigrants coming across the border. It was not trade deficit with China. It was not over-regulation of banks and the environment. But it was healthcare. It was wages, clean water. And fundamentally it came down to this, that we don't matter anymore. We don't matter in the economy. We don't matter in politics. And that's why we're angry, and that's why we're lashing out. So they put together a program of backyard cookouts with these people and progressives, bringing them together so we might have conversations around what it is we do have in common and what kind of politics we might build out of that. So that's the kind of thing that I think we've got to have more of. And KGNU can be a great sponsor of backyard cookouts in all of their listening area. KGNU cookouts, what's wrong with that? And bring folks together and begin to have these kinds of conversations. And then in addition to those kinds of realities of where people are, we've got the great movement that is building. The upstart groups and coalitions of upstart groups. I'm working with one on the national board of Our Revolution, which is the follow-up to Bernie's campaign, and then I'm doing it in Texas, Our Revolution, Texas, and I'm working with John Weiss, and John Weiss is here somewhere tonight out of Colorado Springs. By the way, he's leading the fight to localize the Denver Post here to keep it from becoming another conglomerate media offshoot. I'm going over to Colorado Springs tomorrow, and we're going to have a great rally over there tomorrow evening. But these kind of groups are coming together. I'm doing it through Our Revolution, which doesn't want to just turn Texas and Colorado and places like that blue. We want to turn them a bright Bernie blue. And so those are the kind of people we're running and kind of issues we're backing, and et cetera. But we're working with all the other terrific groups in Black Lives Matter, the Working Families Party, Indivisible, Elect Her, the National Nurses Union, which does such tremendous work across the country. The teachers, West Virginia, Arizona, Oklahoma, Washington State. Teachers are on the move finally. Moral Mondays with Reverend William Barber over in North Carolina and throughout the South. The DSA, Democratic Socialists of America, the League of United Latin American Citizens, an old organization that has now become a new organization. Domingo Garcia out of Dallas, Texas, taking the leadership of that. A new group of millennial women, JOLT, they call themselves. These kind of groups are coming together. And I mentioned Colorado Springs. You know, here I am in sunny Boulder. I was in Madison last night, you know, basking in the glow of progressivism. Colorado Springs now has a majority of progressives on the city council. Because they did what I'm talking about right here. They went door to door. They brought people together. They recruited good candidates and ran those candidates and turned the vote out, and they won earlier this year. These are new activists, new energy, new skills, new unity. We got to bring all of this together. I think of it in terms of a little hardware store. Again, I don't want to overdo this, but again, in my neighborhood in South Austin, it's a little hardware store called Harold's Hardware, and it's a family entity. It's not a box store. It's not quite as big as this room, but it's a great place because you don't have to buy the whole carton of nails. You know, if you want 2 nails, they'll sell you 2 nails. You know, And they'll say, well, what are you trying to do? Well, I want to build a podium. Okay, well, let's pencil it out here. And get some butcher paper and figure out what you need. And they'll loan you a tool. You could take a power saw home and bring it back. And the slogan at Harold's Hardware is, together, we can do it yourself. That's got to be our slogan, doesn't it? Because we can't do it ourselves, but together, we can do all of it. Just an example, not to tax your patience with it too much, but in Texas, our revolution nationally is an independent, democratic, literally democratic, aggressively progressive political movement. And it's electing the most astonishing candidates all over. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez up in New York. Ben Jealous, governor of Maryland. We've got Andrew Gillum, Democratic nominee to the governor of Florida. Stacey Abrams in Georgia. Ayanna Pressley in Massachusetts. I mean, again and again, there's just a few, and these are the higher profile ones. Down ballot, we're electing people all across the board. In Texas, statewide, we've got 12,000 Our Revolution members. That's bigger than any union in Texas. Activists who want to do something, mostly young people who are anti-organization, by the way, which makes it interesting to try to organize them. And we're running everywhere. We're not just in Austin and Dallas. We're in Wichita Falls. They say Wichita Falls is not the end of the earth, but you can see it from here. Wichita Falls, we're in Lubbock, we're in Tyler, we're in the red areas. People who have been ignored by the Democratic Party for decades now, and we're running statewide. We're winning we're winning 45% of the races that we enter. 45% of the races that we're in. And these are no-name candidates. They have no money. They have no organization behind them except these enthusiasm of Berniecrats and others, the Black Lives Matter and et cetera, these groups that come forward. But this is the new politics, and we have to capture it. You can't just wait on it to happen. You've got to reach out and capture it, and the way you capture it is by running them for office, and then them generating it. We elected a guy, he was an 18-year-old high school senior in Pearland, Texas, a suburb of Houston. And he defeated the incumbent school board president. He is now on the school board. And he did it by organizing his 18s and 17-year-olds who became 18-year-olds to vote, getting them registered, and then they got their parents to vote, and they swamped this guy who was the incumbent there. That's the way you go of politics, right there. And we're taking on the Democratic Party. We had our state convention in June in Dallas, Fort Worth. We ran 18 seats on the State Democratic Executive Committee. We won 10 of the 18 seats. We're launching a Healthy Texas campaign, which is Medicare for all in Texas. We have the worst healthcare system short of Mississippi in the country. And yet the Democrats in the legislature have never even introduced a bill to have a better healthcare system. So with the National Nurses Union, we're putting Medicare for all on the table, and that gives us the initiative, because we can go with our networks all across the state to every state representative and say, here's our bill, we want you to support this, and they'll say no, and we'll say, well, the people in this district do want it, and so we're gonna go tell them that you don't want it. And then we're gonna shove it right up their face. It could get worse, but right there. And we won't win that in the next legislative session, but we will advance it dramatically just by putting it on the table. And that's the kind of offensive that we have got to go on. You know, I grew up, I think I mentioned, in a little town in Denison, Texas, and it's a small town, and I was a small guy growing up, and it's the kind of town where there'd be occasional fistfights, and I learned early on, you should never hit a man with glasses. You should use something much heavier. And the heaviest thing that we have is you. People, just ordinary workaday people, not superstars, not politicians, not anybody's, just ordinary people. Rally them like the National Action is doing, going door to door and just talking to people. Rally them into a real political movement that can take power. And that's our slogan in Texas with our revolution. We are not here to protest the government, we are here to become the government. And that has to be our attitude. Well, spoken longer than I meant to already. A friend of mine has been a pioneer in the organic movement years ago, because the powers that be tell us, well, you can't beat the money, you can't beat corporate America, you can't do this. The establishment's too overwhelming. So you just got to get along somehow or other. But this friend of mine who's been a pioneer in the organic movement, as he put it, he said, those who say it can't be done should not interrupt those who are doing it. And that would be you. You good folks, through KGNU. I'll leave you with this thought. It's from Louis Grisard, the late great Southern humorist, who said something that we in the South have always known to be true, and that is that there's a great big difference between being naked and being naked. Naked means you have no clothes on. Naked, that means you have no clothes on and you are up to something. So let's get naked together. Thank you very much. Thanks to KGNU. 40 more years of KGNU.
Thank you. You can stay seated, but let's have another round of applause for that rabble-rouser from Texas. Good evening. Thank you all for being here. Before we hear from our next speaker, Amy Goodman, we're going to acknowledge some of the early volunteers with us here tonight who were instrumental in launching KGNU. For those of you unfamiliar with KGNU's early days, KGNU celebrated its first on-air broadcast 40 years ago on May 22nd, 1978. As Jim alluded to, just across the creek in a little cottage over there, it was the wild and crazy days, believe me, because I was there. It was called a bold and brash idea, labeled by its founders a desperate or last-ditch attempt to start a radio station. Since that first broadcast, KGNU acquired 1390 AM in 2004 and opened a Denver studio to better serve the greater metropolitan area. In 2016, we acquired 98.7 FM to extend coverage to our northern neighbors, was a signal in Fort Collins. And over the past 40 years, KGNU has proudly provided diverse music, news, and public affairs to entertain and inform. It wasn't that many years ago, I'm sure that some of you will remember, that there were some loud voices saying radio is dead. But they have been proven wrong. And it continues to thrive with 91% of Americans over the age of 12 tuning in every week. At KGNU, a small staff working with more than 400 active volunteers produce, host, report, DJ, and govern the station, broadcasting 18 to 20 hours of locally produced programming each day. And it all started with volunteers, and that's why we're here tonight to honor them. These individuals, whose names I'm about to call, have been involved from 1978 to 1988. Some of them continue to be involved. We would like to recognize these individuals for their dedicated commitment to the community radio station. And as your name is called, please come forward because we do have a token of gratitude. Carl Arman. Carl was one of the originals back in 1978 doing news and public affairs reporting and was just elected to the board of directors this month. Carl says volunteering for KGNU is a form of contributing to the resistance movement. Yes. Len Barron. Len's portrayal of Albert Einstein in local theater performances is a recent incarnation by the Renaissance man, but he also created 2 KGNU programs on Cabbages and Kings in 1980 and on parenting and other things.
He also helped organize KGNU's first remote broadcast to cover the encirclement of protesters around Rocky Flats in 1983. Then, David Bartsamian. David is best known for his syndicated weekly program, Alternative Radio, now 32 years young, but he started at KGNU in 1978, producing and hosting Ganges to the Nile and later Hemispheres, editing reel-to-reel tape with razor blades and wax pencils. He also served as KGNU's news director. Thank you, David. Robin Clare. Robin was a regular volunteer at KGNU even before she started her Tributaries program in 1992. She has also been instrumental in training junior high and high school students interested in radio during KGNU's summer internship programs. Robin. Joanne Cole. There she comes. Joanne began at KGNU in 1987, answering phones and working membership drives. She later she served as KGNU's development director for 20 years, and she's gone on to DJ shows such as Blues Legacy, Dixieland, Morning Sound Alternative, The Sunday Gospel Show, and Dusty Grooves. Thank you. Dan Culberson. Dan was at one time the editor of the KGNU program guide and director of publicity and membership, but probably more remembered as KGNU's film critic from 1979 until 2014, and that was called Hot Shots. It was a 2-minute synopsis that provided an insightful and humorous recap of mainstream movies. What a long time. Thank you, Dan. Phil Dugan. Phil Dugan began putting his shoulder to the wheel for KGNU in 1984, answering phones during the fund drive. He has been on the board of directors, the building committee, and helped during our purchase of the 1390 signal and the building purchase in 2000. Thank you, Phil. Michael Daragish. In the early days, KGNU had a studio. None of you will remember this. KGNU had a studio in the basement of CU Student Union. I was there. And the student programming coordinator was Michael Daragish. Michael also acted as a liaison between KGNU and CU. Imagine that being a tough job. It was. It was. Thank you, Michael. Joel Edelstein. Joel got involved with KGNU while employed as a professor at CU Denver, teaching political economy courses and seminars. And those interests, of course, were a perfect fit for KGNU news and public affairs shows, including Connections. From 2003 until 2014, he served as KGNU's news interim director and co-news director. Thank you, Joel. Elaine Erb. Elaine is actually better known around the station as E.C. Erb. She's been a volunteer since 1984. She has served as a music director and on the board of directors, including as chair. She's a regular on the Afternoon Sound Alternative and host of both Musica Mundi and Jazz and Beyond. Thank you. Doug Gertner. Doug's first task at KGNU was to babysit the studio during the airing of a radio drama based on Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. That was around 1981. He worked his way up as a substitute for Friday evening jazz shifts before moving away, but then back in Colorado 30 years later, he has reconnected and joined the Morning Sound Alternative rotation. Karen Gruber. Karen has volunteered with KGNU since 1980. behind the scenes, working the phones as a pledge drive volunteer, and then working with the budget committee and later taking on shifts at the front desk, and more recently as a member of the events committee. Teresa Halsey. KGNU's early days of bringing diversity to the airwaves would not have been possible without Teresa Halsey. Indian Voices explores Native American issues, music, and culture. Teresa also produces a regular newsletter and calendar about Indigenous events. Thank you, Teresa. Rolf Piasek. Rolf was a professor at CU when he became part of the first group of producers for the Hemispheres program. He was also on the board of directors, a dedicated photographer who currently spends as much time as possible walking the streets of Paris.
And a shout out from California, from Gonzalo Santos, a co-founder of Hemispheres. He wanted to be here, but says, keep speaking truth to power with style.
John Lendorf. John likes to say that he has been involved with food one way or another since he baked his first Prince lasagna in Massachusetts. We're still not sure if we know what a Prince lasagna is, but I'm sure John knows. Fortunately for us, he moved to Boulder, a syndicated food columnist. John was a volunteer at KGNU from the very earliest days, and is also the host of our Radio Nibbles weekly program focused on food, cooking, and dining. Leslie Lomas. Leslie is a longtime volunteer who has also been a member of the program committee for many years, held a seat on the board of directors, hosted classical music shows as well as Celtic music. She has also recorded many interviews of KGNU's original folks and others for the Carnegie Library Oral History Program. Donovan Maka. Reggae Bloodlines, heard Saturday afternoons on KGNU, is the longest running reggae show in North America. Donovan has been the principal DJ for Reggae Bloodlines for 40 years, enlightening Colorado to the different styles of reggae. Thank you, Donovan. Kathleen Martindale. Kathleen was an early member of the KGNU Board of Directors and has used her artistic gifts to help KGNU with fundraisers, including the popular Prairie Dog Art Project in the 1980s. She has also worked on KGNU's book and record sales and our annual plant sale, helping to raise thousands of dollars for KGNU. Thank you, Kathleen. David McIntosh. David was working at KGNU even before the station went on the air, believe it or not. An early board member and sometime DJ, David is also KGNU's historian and believes KGNU's approach to programming and the role it has played in serving a politically informed public is like no other. Thank you, David. Kathy Partridge. Kathy was a member of the socialist feminist collective that produced Feminist Frequencies in the mid-1980s. She has also produced Hemispheres programs and is a current host of Connections. Ginger Perry. Ginger came to KGNU after a DJ DJ stint at KBCO. She not only continues hosting a regular morning sound alternative show, but also the Gospel Chime Hour, Highway 322, and Roots and Branches, and her love of music is infectious. You should listen. Let me ask, is Jack Rummel here tonight? No, Jack? Okay. Jack, are you here, Jack? Well, we're going to honor you anyway. Jack Rummel, nearly every week for 38 years, has hosted Ragtime America on KGNU. Jack remembers that he got about 15 minutes of training before he started spinning discs at KGNU, playing what he likes to call America's first truly original music. Thank you, Jack. Will Schlaven. Will started the free school. Are any of you old enough to remember that? Will started the free school and was a member of KGNU's first board of directors. He was instrumental in getting volunteers excited about starting a community radio station, and clearly he was wildly successful. Fergus Stone. Fergus came on board with KGNU around 1980 and has done everything from host the first on-air science show to serve as station manager. In between, he has delighted us with music during morning sound alternative shows and Old Grass, New Grass, and is our stellar master of ceremonies at the Charles, KGNU's annual Blueberry Summit. Richard Chuel. Richard is a Native American journalist and civil rights activist. Long before he became a part of KGNU, he was participating in the Wounded Knee incident in 1973. In 1978, he began collaborating with Native American students to develop what is now called Indian Voices on KGNU, again, one of our longest running programs. Kerry Wilson. Kerry's blues legacy was a fixture on KGNU's program lineup even before it was syndicated. Kerry was involved with the station from its earliest beginnings in the class at Boulder's Free School. He hosted many Grateful Dead specials and currently hosts Groovin' for Geezers.
I see a few of you out there, too.
You can catch that on the Morning Sound Alternative. Thank you, Kerry.
And last but not least, Roz Brown. Roz learned the ropes of broadcasting at KGNU and then went on to a career in commercial radio and public relations. While looking through documents to support this event, Roz discovered her own handwriting on some of the files from 1980 and said she knew she made the right choice when she decided to renew her volunteer commitment to KGNU in 2010. Thank you, Roz. Thank you.
Okay, just a bit more now before we hear from Amy. We would also like to recognize the early dedicated volunteers who could not be here with us tonight. They include David Andrea, Michael Bradshaw, Howard Davidson, Marty Derlin, Frank Dubofsky, Bill Cohen, Greg Friedman, Sandra Fields, Dave Gloss, Elena Klaber, Peter Langsfelder, Diane Mahan Singh, Neil Parker, Steve Prim, Carla Selby, Doug Schlompek, Terry Reardon, John Stark, Joan Wernick, Kenny Weisberg, and David Wilson. And of course, there were many, many, many others. Many who stepped up for a few days. Maybe they stepped for a week, for months, maybe a year. So let's give them a shout out too. Wherever they are. Thank you. And let's just give one more round of applause to the folks who really made it happen in the early days. Thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you. And so now, let's recognize all the KGNU volunteers in the room with us tonight. We want to thank you for your commitment to this station. I would like to ask you, if you are a KGNU volunteer, could you please stand? We would like to recognize these individuals for their tireless work on air and behind the scenes to power our radio station 24/7. Some of them are like many of the people we just recognized. On behalf of the board of directors, thank you for your dedication. Please go to the back of the room. Barbara and Kathy have something to thank you. They have a certificate for you back there. And thank you for all you do to keep KGNU authentic, eclectic, and community powered. Thank you for joining me and welcoming now John Walton, our former board of directors. John. Okay. We have left someone out. Isn't that a show? All those thousands and thousands of people volunteering at KGNU, but we do want to recognize and honor Chris Nathan. Chris Nathan is here tonight. And now, a warm welcome for John Walton, our former board of directors, is up next. Thank you, John.
All right, good evening, everybody. I am John Walton. I used to be on the board. As of a month ago, I rolled off, so I'm the guy that probably has been sending you emails for the last 4.5 years. You probably like, who the heck is that? Well, it was me, so no more emails for me. This evening, I'm really excited because I have the pleasure of introducing our station manager, Tim Russo. We call him Timo. I think most of you know that he prefers to go by Timo, so I may throw a few Timos and Tims in here tonight. But I'm really excited to introduce Tim because if some of you remember when Sam Kuka stepped down from the station back in 2013, I think it was really an interesting period for us as a station because we were looking for the right person during that transition. So Tim, I remember meeting him at one of the meet and greets we did. We did a couple meet and greets with the finalists for the station manager position. And I remember walking away just so impressed with Tim's energy, but most importantly with he had this understanding and this sense of the ability for radio to really change lives and change communities and really make an impact. And I was really impressed by that. So 2 years later, when we finally managed to get Tim into the building as our station manager, I couldn't have been happier. Because I think Tim is the right person to help us kind of transition from his last 40 years into the next 40 and well beyond. I'm sure we'll be going along for another 100 years. I'm not quite sure I'll be here for that celebration, but if I am, great. And I think one of the most important things that I really appreciate about Tim is just that, he comes from this background in media where he worked with a myriad of media agencies in Mexico and in Central America. And what I got out of that is just that Tim has a really great understanding and a great cultural intelligence that really helps him understand what's going on in the community. So, with Tim's connections to KGNU, before he even got here, his connections because he was a contributor on La Lucha Sigue, as well as the work that Tim was doing at CU and his connections in the front range community, was really something that drew us to Tim and bringing him on board here. So, as I kind of look back and I think about this, and I really think about our mission, and there's a couple things we say in the mission that I think are so important to what we're doing today and what we're going to be doing in the next 5 years, let's say, as we start talking about this capital campaign. And one of them is just the idea of reflecting the diversity of the local and world community, right? To provide a channel for individuals and groups and issues and music that may have been overlooked, suppressed, or underrepresented by other media. That's from our mission statement, and that's what I know that Tim is able to do for us here. Tim called me up 2 years ago and said, hey, there's this thing called the Community Culture and Safety Grant in Boulder, and I think we should apply. And I said, well, tell me more. I knew a little bit about it. Tim had this vision for what we could make the station into, which is a media center for the whole community. Not just a radio station, but a place where we could change this next generation of media makers. And so with Tim's vision, and I think many of you that know the process of getting on the ballot, getting 2 M&N passed for us, and now being at a point where we can get matching funds for $1.25 million, I say it's Tim. Tim had the vision, and he really drove us on the board to get behind it. So, you know, the way I look at it, I just feel that we as a community are really, really blessed to have somebody leading us here in the next 40 years that has the leadership, he has the cultural intelligence, and most importantly, he has the vision to take us into the next 40 years. So please join me. Welcome Timo Russo, our station manager.
Well, I want to thank John for 6 years of dedicated service on the board of directors as well. He just recently stepped down. He was term limited. He was served as the board chair for, I believe, 5 of those 6 years, which might be one of the longest running chairs that KGNU has had. I'm not sure of some of the deeper history. I'm going to have to check in with David McIntosh and have Fergus over here about some of that history as well. But first, I want to thank everybody for coming out this evening. It's been just a really pleasurable evening. It's amazing to have Jim Hightower in the house. I don't know that I've laughed this hard in quite some time, and unfortunately I'm not nearly as humorous as Jim is, so you're going to have to bear with me a little bit as far as that goes, a little bit drier. Although recently in a 360 evaluation that I did as a part of the Colorado Creative Leadership Industries thing, it came out that I was somewhat entertaining, and I was a little concerned by that, so I should really consider that at all. And I know we want to hear Amy. We want to definitely get Amy up here. She's just been a tremendous supporter of KGNU over the years, and it seems so appropriate to have both Amy and Jim in the house celebrating 40 years of KGNU, 40 years of making waves with us tonight. I'm just going to take a couple of quick moments and share a few thoughts that I had, and we'll get into some of the issues that John talked about as well. But as KGNU nears the end of an epic 40th year on air, 40 years, we celebrate the milestones and the foundations laid by the hundreds of dedicated volunteers, many of you here in the room with us tonight, the visionaries, the listeners, the supporters, the community members who have participated in the various stages and iterations, and there have been a few, of this community asset. Since its first days as a mere concept to amplify the voices of people in Boulder who felt their music, culture, and critical views were not represented in the profit-driven media landscape. Those who led the way, many as active now, today, 40 years later, many of you in the room, as you were 40 years ago, many that we've lost along the way, have now been joined by so many more droves of volunteers and listeners and supporters that have added to the pulse of KGNU, a true community-powered media project. In 1978, KGNU published its definition of community radio and its first program guide. It read a little something like this: community radio offers a unique approach to radio broadcasting. Basic to community radio is access and participation. Volunteers participate in all aspects of the operation, from serving on the board of directors, doing programming, publishing program guides, answering telephones, to help raising funds. The idea is that radio can be a community project, with participation open to everyone. In community radio, programming to then reflect the diversity of interests. Our hope is that KGNU will affect the daily lives of our listeners. Well, 40 years later, we have witnessed the growth and the relevance of that community project. This year, the Boulder County Commissioners and the Boulder City Council passed proclamations declaring May 22nd, 2018, Community Broadcasting Day. They encourage Boulder City and county residents to celebrate the importance of local, independent community media and its vital role in the democratic process. Now more than ever, these proclamations are of extreme importance, as the ripple effect of an accelerated consolidation in the media landscape, in particular the commercial media landscape, threatens the overall capacity and quality of local journalism. We see that. We see that here. It's impacting Colorado, not just the statewide print media, the last one, the Denver Post, but also Boulder's very own, the Daily Camera, and all of the Prairie Dog media that's owned by that hedge fund. We don't need to mention their name, I don't think. Well, it first started here. Jim mentioned this. So thanks for knowing that history. But it started here, literally here, downstairs, out back here, somewhere along the Boulder Creek in a little cottage, where that project that Will helped to start, the one that was called the Free School, a desperate attempt to start a non-commercial radio station in Boulder, it came to fruition. Those were the first bold steps of building a long-lasting community media outlet. It took more than 4 years to start at the station, and less than 3, there was a few turbulent moments. Some of you guys are going to remember that. I think Fergus remembers this one, David as well, Leslie, others. In March 1981, when the plug was pulled, against all odds, KGNU, and more so the people, all of you, many others, behind the movement that powered this movement, were determined to have a functioning community radio. The radio was back on the air in a matter of weeks. Not very much money in the cadres, but they made it happen, and were as robust and vibrant as ever. Since 1978, KGNU has consistently built upon that original vision. Decade after decade, whether it is as the founding member of the National Federation of Community Broadcasters, whether it was birthing the Grassroots Radio Coalition, whether it was spearheading the Rocky Mountain Community Radio Coalition and its capital coverage, or more recently, working to form the Colorado Media Alliance, KGNU has never ceased its work to democratize the media landscape through engaged and participatory media powered by the community. Our KGNU volunteers have been at the heart and maintained that pulse of the movement since its inception. And we like to say now that in this time of technology and logarithms, rotations and norms of popularity, KGNU continues to be about that authentic, passionate, deeply involved, and actively engaged people, human beings, doing what they do for all of you. It's the human factor that sets KGNU apart. This human factor, it happens in real time. There's a spontaneity and a beauty in the simple idea that by nature is a little rough around the edges, served up straight, honest, authentic, passionate, and unbridled. Whether through programming such as Hemispheres, Alternative Radio, Indian Voices, Democracy Now!, Outsources, Connections, African Roots, Reggae Bloodlines, Eclipse, a historic, the longest running, not only hip-hop program in Colorado or in the nation, but in the world. Programming like Pasalavos.org, Musica Mundi, world-class, old grass, new grass, Women Air, one of my personal favorites, La Lucha Sigue. And so many more award-winning productions, KGNU connects our community to the global clamor to build a world where many worlds fit. In March 2015, an international collaborative network of independent, community, indigenous, LGBTQ, and global South media activists met in Tunis. It was around the time of the Arab uprising, the Arab Spring, a little bit later. They got together to finalize the World Charter of Free Media. After 6 years in the making, almost as long as it took us to rewrite our bylaws, the core tenets of the Charter declared, we are individuals and collectives, professionals, amateurs, and enthusiasts participating in the democratization of communication from the local to the global level, affirming that democratization and the right to communicate for all are essential if we are to build a just and sustainable world. Our means of communication attach great value to the diversity of expression and understanding of the world, tolerance, and the equitable distribution of speech over power. We promote social participation, cooperation above all, and the sharing of information among different media and between producers. We fight against all discourses of violence, promoting hatred and intolerance. We highlight other ways of living, other representations of the world, and we encourage new forms of participation and political engagement, training people to use a critical reading of the media. KGNU embodies an everyday local iteration of this worldwide movement, I see it every day. I see it with everybody that walks in the doors of KGNU, and I've never ceased to be amazed by that perseverance, that commitment, that drive to make the world a better place. Our vision is to amplify and engage global community rooted in mutual respect, working together to advance a more equitable, just, and environmentally sustainable society that ensures all peoples access to and participation in independent media. KGNU is committed. We're committed to providing the media tools and the training to empower the next generation of young community makers to challenge the rapid impact of media consolidation regionally, while amplifying their critical voices and perspectives on issues suppressed and overlooked by much of the media, in particular the commercial media, but also a lot of the public media. In November 2017, and John, thanks for mentioning this, the City of Boulder residents, many of you here, voted overwhelmingly, 82%, in favor to approve an extension on the Community Culture and Safety Capital Improvements tax. And KGNU now has an opportunity and a responsibility in front of us. We stand to benefit from this ballot initiative with a matching grant of $1.25 million to expand and upgrade and modernize our facilities here in Boulder. Once we raise this match together, and I mean together, we're going to convert those headquarters into an environmentally sustainable and resilient facility. We're going to add roughly 6,000 square feet to the building. We're going to equip that space with new digital studios. We're going to keep some analog stuff there. We've got to have some legacy studios around, make it feasible, and remember our history. We're going to add those studios to the broadcast studios and a permanent media makers training space, a renovated community space for the entire community, and a small community performance space for public engagement, and to continue to highlight many of the local artists that wouldn't otherwise get a kickoff in their very, very successful careers. All of these are integral components of a functioning multicultural community media center offering improved resources and media services to our communities. And tonight, we hope that you'll be inspired to unite with us in planting the first seeds to bring this future into fruition. I invite you all to join KGNU on this journey of community-powered media. Discover the power. Tune in. Stay engaged. Join us in celebrating 40 years of making waves, the history that really opened the doors to the future of our community media. Thank you so much. Really pleased that you could be here tonight. And I just want to have one last shout out and a huge round of thanks before I give up the mic. So please join me in offering a huge applause to the folks that helped to organize this evening's event and the 40th anniversary events that have been going on all year long. Roz Brown, Barbara Stern, Lisa Keller, Tracy Sundin, the entire 40th anniversary planning committee, and an extra special thank you to Kathy Metzger, who hasn't stopped. I'm not sure if she's even slept this year. And none of this would have been possible without all of the support and the determination of Sarah Shirazi, our Community Development Director, for putting on all of the events that started with an amazing kickoff at the Goose Town with the Eclipse Collective, celebrating many, many years of hip-hop on KGNU, moving through to 40 years of celebrating the Reggae Bloodlines Collective that we had down in Denver, bringing Daniel Ellsberg to Boulder to celebrate the resistance against the Rocky Flats, bringing the National Indigenous Congress from Mexico throughout Denver, Boulder, and Longmont to share their vision for a more sustainable and inclusive world. And we're not done yet. We're not even done this evening. We're going to ask you to join us on November 9th for a rundown of the elections with Noam Chomsky, who's going to be doing a live video feed just for this community and in support of KGNU. So join us then, and we'll be getting more information out about that. But right now, I want to bring up Dave Conrad, our fearless news director, who keeps us well informed every single morning, Monday through Friday, a voice that we've all become extremely dependent upon, and just an amazing individual. So Dave, thank you so much for being here, being a part of KGNU, and making us that much more engaged every single day.
Thank you, Timo. I am but a cog in the wheel, and the other cogs are all here. volunteers who get up at 5 a.m. to come in and make the news happen, so thank you all. So as Emma said, I'm Maeve Conran and I'm the news director. It's my great privilege to be the news director at KGNU. And for many of you in the audience, our very next speaker this evening needs no introduction, but I'll give one anyway. As KGNU listeners, you know that during our on-air fundraisers, we love to boast that KGNU is one of the very first stations in the country to broadcast Democracy Now! Back in 1996, Democracy Now! The War and Peace Report began 22 years ago, and since that very first broadcast, Democracy Now! Has remained an independent global news program, broadcast daily on radio, television, and of course the web. Amy Goodman is not only a broadcast journalist, heard every weekday morning on KGNU at 7 a.m., but she's also a syndicated columnist, an investigative reporter, an author. She is the recipient of many awards, including the 2012 Gandhi Peace Award for a significant contribution to the promotion of an enduring international peace. Now, Amy has authored 6 books, including her latest New York Times bestseller, Democracy Now! 20 Years Covering the Movements Changing America. And because she's always at the center of progressive news stories, she's actually been arrested more than once. Most recently in North Dakota, and that was while she was covering what was happening with the Dakota Access Pipeline. Now, the charges against her were eventually dropped, unlike the charges facing many of the water protectors who were also arrested at that time. But before those charges were dropped, she put a huge spotlight on an issue that the mainstream media had largely ignored until that moment. And as Amy says, independent media can go to where the silence is and break the sound barrier, doing what the corporate networks refuse to do. And as the midterm elections draw near, and the tweeter-in-chief continues to wreak havoc on our democracy day in and day out, Amy Goodman is here to help us remember that we cannot be silent. So please join me in a very warm welcome for Amy Goodman.
To be here with all of you, who I follow all over the country, everything he says, so it's wonderful to be in the same room with him. Yes, and to celebrate this media institution, this enemy of the American people. And of course I say that in no way seriously how threatening it is that the President of the United States, that the Commander-in-Chief calls the media the enemy of the American people. I originally come from Pacifica Radio, which was it's a little older than KGNU, founded in 1949 by a war resistor who, when he came out of the detention camps, named Blue Hill, said there has to be a media outlet that's not run by corporations that profit from war, but run by journalists and artists. And that's how Pacifica was born. The first station, KPFA in Berkeley, 49. As George Gerbner, the late dean of the Annenberg School of Communications at the University of Pennsylvania, would say, not run by corporations that have nothing to tell and everything to sell, that are raising our children today. KPFK was the second Pacifica station in Los Angeles in 1959. My station, WBAI in New York, went on the air in 1960, and within a year it was broadcasting a debate between Malcolm X and James Baldwin on the effectiveness of nonviolent civil disobedience, the effectiveness of the sit-ins of the 60s. 1970, KPFT went on the air in Houston, Texas, in the Petro Metro. 1977, the fifth of the Pacifica Five, WPFW in Washington, D.C., went on the air in 1977. Not much later than that, in 1978, KGNU was soon to follow and going on the air right here. I want to talk for a moment about KPFT in Houston that went on the air in 1970 and within a few weeks was blown off the air by the Ku Klux Klan, the only radio station in the country to be blown up. The Klan strapped dynamite to the base of the transmitter and blew it to smithereens. When they got back on their feet, the station, and rebuilt the transmitter a few weeks later, the Klan strapped 15 times the dynamite to the base of the transmitter and blew it up again right in the middle of Arlo Guthrie singing Alice's Restaurant, which I thought was a good song. But, so now they had to really regroup. It took months to get back on the air. In January of 1971, KPFT, well, that phoenix rose from the ashes. The national media covered KPFT going back on the air. Arlo Guthrie came to Houston to finish his song live on the air, and KPFT was reborn just about and has been broadcasting ever since. Now, I can't remember if it was the Grand Dragon or the Exalted Cyclops, because I often confuse their titles. But he said it was his proudest act. And I think that's because he understood how dangerous independent media is. Dangerous because, like KGNU, it allows people to speak for themselves. And when you hear someone speaking from their own experience, whether it's a Palestinian child or an Israeli grandmother, whether it is an elder of the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation in North Dakota, or a bride about to get married in Yemen, whose wedding party is struck by a US drone. When you hear someone describing their own experience, it breaks down barriers. It challenges the stereotypes and the caricatures that fuel the hate groups like the KKK. It's why the Klan blew up Pacifica Radio. It's why Donald Trump hates the American media today. Because you come to understand where someone is coming from. I'm not even saying agree with it. I mean, how often do we agree with our family members? But it makes it much less likely that you'll want to destroy the person. That understanding is the beginning of peace. I think the media can be the greatest force for peace on earth. Instead, all too often, it is wielded as a weapon of war. And that's why we have to take the media back. And why we have to celebrate KGNU tonight. There is so much to celebrate. I see the media as a huge kitchen table that stretches across the globe, that we all sit around and debate and discuss the most important issues of the day. War and peace, life and death, and anything less than that is a disservice to the servicemen and women of this country. You know, they can't have these debates on military bases. They rely on us in civilian society to have the debates that lead to the decisions about whether they live or die, whether they're sent to kill or be killed. Anything less than that is a disservice to a democratic society. You know, I was once speaking somewhere, and someone came up to me after the talk and said, you know, I always say, you know, this is Democracy Now!, the War and Peace report. And he said, can you tell me who War and Peace is? And so I said, War and Peace? He said, yeah, who is this guy Warren? the War and Peace Report. I want to talk for a moment about what happened at Standing Rock and how important it is to the struggle for sustainability and against war today. It was April 1st, 2016, when the unofficial historian of the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation in North Dakota, LaDonna Brave Bull Allard, opened her home and her property along the Cannonball River in North Dakota to the resistance. The resistance? The resistance to, well, what they called the Black Snake, the $3.8 billion Dakota Access Pipeline that would snake its way from the North Dakota Bakken oil fields, taking fracked oil from North Dakota through South Dakota, Iowa, Illinois, and then hook up with a pipeline to the Gulf of Mexico. And the Standing Rock Sioux said no. Now, actually, they weren't different from other North Dakotans. The people of Bismarck, the capital, they said no to DAPL, the Dakota Access Pipeline, and their views were respected. The people of Mandan, where the prison and the courthouses, they said no. They didn't want DAPL there, and their views were respected. The problem for the Native Americans is they weren't so lucky. They were deeply concerned about the Dakota Access Pipeline, owned by Energy Transfer Partners, being drilled under the Missouri River, the longest river in the United States, that would imperil the water supply of 17 million people downstream, native and non-native. So LaDonna Brave Bull Allard said, come to my property, set up teepees and tents, and she thought a couple dozen people would come and she would support them. First dozens, then scores of people, then hundreds of people, then thousands of people came. Native American tribes from Latin America, from the United States, First Nations, from Canada. It was the largest unification of Native American tribes seen in this country in many decades. It was astounding what happened. Now remember, this is 2016. This is the time of the presidential election. So it's unfolding, and this historic, epic moment is as well. This movement is building. Think about the general election debates. Not one of the corporate, journalists who moderated the debates, I call them news personalities, asked a question about climate change, let alone about the Dakota Access Pipeline. It's interesting, I was invited to a panel at State University of New York, Albany, that was moderated by Bob Schieffer, right, major CBS figure. And I raised this issue. And, I go on MSNBC sometimes and CNN and talk to the host, why don't you deal with climate change? Hurricane Florence right now. That's really devastating the Carolinas and Virginia. I think the death toll now is at 14, something like that tonight. And the media is covering it extensively, as they should. But watch it carefully. I'm not even talking about Fox. I'm talking about MSNBC and CNN. Watch it carefully. They're spending almost 24 hours, sending all their hosts and reporters down there. How often do they raise the issue of climate change, of global warming? Even though some of them have been fighting these fires for years because they're ex-felons. It's an amazing story. But this is a story of the intersection of climate change and environmental justice, showing the inequality and the people who are the most vulnerable on the front lines. Even Governor Brown thanked the prisoners saying they are risking their lives to save lives and to save property. We must examine all of this. And it's absolutely critical that we have an independent media like KGNU, like Democracy Now!, bringing you not the pundits describing their stories, which they wouldn't even bother to do, but hearing the prisoners themselves telling their own stories, the men and the women and the children who are doing this. There are so many stories to be told. There is not enough media to tell it. Among the stories that we focused on at Democracy Now! Is the story of the Denver Post, for example, and the Alden Hedge Fund. And when the Denver Post reporters came to New York to protest outside the hedge fund, Democracy Now! Had them on. Because it's not just Denver, right? And of course, wasn't just the Denver Post. Before that, the Rocky Mountain News. We lost the Rocky Mountain News. And for all the criticism of these print papers and being the gatekeepers and only allowing in certain voices, we need all the media we can get and all the media that we can pressure, to open up more. But it is absolutely critical, because no, the media is not the enemy of the American people. It's the media that will save us. The media must be, as KGNU is, a sanctuary of dissent. And I just wanted to end by telling a story from World War II. Pacifica Radio started right after World War II. Democracy Now! Began on Pacifica Radio and KGNU. It was just a handful of stations we started on. And now, 22 years later, we're broadcasting on over 1,400 public television and radio stations around the country and around the world. And afterwards, I think that Jim and I will be signing books. And our book, Democracy Now!, I wrote with my colleague Dennis Moynihan and my brother, journalist David Goodman, and I'm thrilled to be working once again with Boulder Books. But I wanted to end where Dennis started his vacation. It's so funny to put the word Dennis together with vacation, because he never takes one. But amazingly enough, he's not here tonight, even as a Denverite, because he had promised to go on the cycling trip with his wife Trish and friends from here in Denver. And they began their trip in Germany, at the grave site of Hans and Sophie Scholl. And that's where I wanted to end this story, with Hans and Sophie. In World War II, these young students, brother and sister, Hans and Sophie Scholl, he was a medical student at the University of Munich, and she was an undergraduate. And together with their professor, Karl Huber, and others, they formed the White Rose Collective. They thought, what can we do in the face of the Nazi atrocity? They weren't Jewish, they were German Christians. And they thought the best we can do is get information out so the Germans would never be able to say, we didn't know. And so they published a series of 6 pamphlets. And on one of those pamphlets were written the words, we will not be silent. They distributed these far and wide. In the middle of the night, they'd have them dropped in alleyways and courtyards, in marketplaces, in schoolyards. And then Hans and Sophie were captured by the Gestapo. They were charged, they were tried, they were convicted, and they were beheaded. But that philosophy, that motto, should be the Hippocratic Oath of the media today, should be the Hippocratic Oath of us all today. We will not be silent. Democracy Now!
Thank you so much to Amy Goodman. It's always such an honor and an inspiration to hear her speaking directly to us. Of course, we hear her weekday mornings planting the seed for the future of KGNU, because we have been reflecting on our 40-year history here, but the future starts today, and it starts with everybody in this room. And we're going to plant the seeds towards raising our $1.25 million goal that will be matched dollar for dollar. Every dollar we raise will be matched by the City of Boulder, and that's thanks to the voters of Boulder. And we're going to plant the seeds this evening. And Amy is my favorite person ever to pitch with, because when she comes on the radio and speaks directly to listeners about why they should give to KGNU, the phones light up. So we're very excited to have had a beginning pledge this evening, because we've had an anonymous donation of $10,000 to be matched right now. And so we're going to get people to raise their hands, but I'm going to give the mic back to Amy to just inspire you, as she always does, as to why it is so important that we all participate this evening.
Well, I really highly encourage you. I know you already gave to come here tonight, but to do whatever you can. The fact that you all, and I congratulate Tim and the whole team, for getting this match from the City of Boulder of over $1 million. If you raise that money in the next few years, that you can build out this community media space, there is nothing more important right now. It provides a forum for a global conversation. And so I really hope you will take seriously that you are the you in KGNU. So what number do you want to start at, Maeve?
Well, we can match this right now, and so how this is going to happen is we're asking people to raise their hands. And when you arrived this evening, you were, there are forms on the table and pens, and so when we arrived this evening, we were all presented with all of that. So please do check around on your table for that. And what we're going to do is ask people to raise their hands.
Okay, now for one thing, there is one thing maybe one person could do. They just got a $10,000 anonymous match. Maybe one person wants to pledge $10,000 to match it. We could start there. Or we can see if one person wants to make that $10,000 pledge, or two people want to pledge $5,000, if that's possible. It may not be possible, but if we don't reach beyond our grasp, you never know. Maybe one person could pledge that $5,000. Think about it, or don't think too much, just do it. Impulsive buying tonight we encourage. And maybe you can't go that far. Maybe $5,000 isn't something you can do. Maybe $2,000 is something you can do. Maybe there's someone who wants to start to meet that $10,000 mark by saying, I can do $2,000. Think about this community media center that young people come to. At Democracy Now! Maeve came there recently and visited. We have classes that come every day and watch the broadcast. Believe it or not, fourth graders, the day we had Noam Chomsky on for the hour, were sitting silently in awe. I could not believe it. The idea that you have this in Boulder and in Denver, classes could come and watch broadcasts, and then the kids know they can make their own media. They're the me in media. You can be a critical part of that. If someone could pledge perhaps $2,000 to start the ball rolling, or $1,000, oh my gosh.
$1,000. Thank you. We have volunteers who will be coming out, and please do fill in the pledge form on your table. But we have that pen. We have another. We've got another 1,000.
Baby that's raising her hand.
We'll have somebody there holding a baby. I don't think the baby's committed to that. But we have that $10,000 match. Somebody now could raise their hand for $7,000, and we will match that full $10,000 right now. Don't be shy. Just raise your hand.
Or 1,000 by 1,000. We're going to get there. I know we can do it. When an infant raises her hand, you know you don't want her to put in the shame.
So we have some $1,000. Anybody else can do $1,000 right now? We raise our hands. I know you're right there. And if you're shy, that's okay. There are pledge forms on the table. We have another. Somebody's pointing at somebody else. We do. Thank you. That's our fourth $1,000. Another one here. We're halfway to matching this full $10,000 right now.
Remember, you can make it happen. If nothing else inspires you, think about President Trump saying, the media is the enemy of the American people. You provide the answer to that. Raise your hand, engage in the act he does not want you to engage in. Not everyone at once, please.
So we're halfway to matching that $10,000 grant. Anybody else right now, if you can't do $1,000, maybe we can do $500, and we'll get there. We've got 500 and 500 right there. Thank you so much. And another 500 right there. So please do raise your hands. And another one. Thank you so much. And another one here. This is great. So that's tracks.
Okay. I hope you're all keeping track. Okay, do we have another $500 contribution? Someone saying, I want to be right here, right over there. Do we have another $500 contribution? There, I think we have another. Don't dare wave to anyone because we're going to hold you accountable. Do we have another $500 contribution? Someone saying, I want to see this media center built. That again, KGNU, we don't want it just to survive, but to thrive, to be there for future generations, to engage in that discussion, to bring out the voices of young and old, seriously talking about solutions, debating ballot initiatives, people who never went into considered, electoral solutions, actually running for office. It so often starts when they're simply interviewed on the radio and they see the power of their voice and how people respond. We have another $500 contribution that someone would like to make. One other person making that, and then we'll take it to $400. One other person saying, I think I can do that. All right. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. So, thank you for all of that. So who could do $400? Yes, we've got $400 right there. Thank you. It's just raising your hand, and don't forget, fill in the pledge forms at your table. And if you're shy and you don't want to raise your hand, just fill in the pledge form because we'll take care of that too. But please do raise your hand.
Can that person raise their hand again so someone from KGNU can go over to you? Okay, right there. If someone can go over from KGNU.
You can keep your hand up, we'll get your form. Anybody else? We're at $400 right now. Anybody else do $400 this evening? Do we have 400? Is that somebody in the back? Or maybe they're waving at somebody? No. Okay. Okay, well let's do 300. $300? Can we raise our hands?